a lot of the claim that's popped up among young women and young men, I think I'll concentrate on young women for a moment, is that, the patriarchy is nothing but authoritarian power. That is what you think if you've never had a good relationship with anybody in a position of authority, And so if you're, a lot of young women who are trapped in progressive hell are trapped there, not least because they've never had a good relationship with anyone male, not a brother, not a father, not a friend. Yeah. So all they see is, and then it's a worse conundrum too, because imagine that you regard the opposite sex as a power mad enemy. Yeah. Well, then the ones that are better at that are going to be more frightening.
Yeah.
So what you want is, if someone's your enemy, you want them to be weak.
Right.
Right. Okay. So these young women who are confused like this are in a terrible conundrum, because if they ever meet a competent man, but their history, tilts them towards interpreting any manifestation of competence as power, they're going to be anti-competence because they're going to assume that that's nothing but a manifestation of power.
Yeah.
So then they're in an absolutely brutal position, because nobody who's competent, they're going to be maximally distrustful of anyone who's competent. Okay, so you're kind of in the same situation because all the people of authority, so to speak, in your life you just saw the hedonistic and exploitative side of that.
Right.
Right. Well, you could also imagine that even your misbehavior, such as it was, that's at a limit.
Right.
That's a limit testing approach, because what you're kind of hoping for is that, you'll push and you'll hit a wall that actually is there.
Right.
Right. And not one that's arbitrary, not one that's just based on power, but one that comes along and says, no, that's actually enough. Enough of that, not least because it's not good for you. Right. And the way people search for that isn't merely by asking. They search for that by misbehaving and watching what happens. That's limit testing.
Yeah.
It has to happen that way.
Well, actually, to illustrate that, during my mother's wild adventures, I lived with my grandparents for a time. She sent me to military school on 2 separate occasions, where I lived on campus. We were cadets. We wore our little uniforms. We had barracks. We had a house mother. And it's funny, I hated it, but I flourished there because there were, if you mess up, you get discipline. And we're talking corporal discipline. They had something notoriously known as the cheese paddle, which was a large paddle with holes drilled in it. And they'd swat you with that thing. And suddenly I went from delinquent kid to honor roll and good grades. And so when I was pulled out of military school and went back to public school and realized how much I could get away with, I returned to my old ways again. So it shows when absolutes were in my life, I would respond. I needed that. But this is different, though, because that was a very strong authoritarian thing. But I think in many ways it was actually kind of good for me at the time.
Well, the thing, the more disagreeable a child is, so, and that be associated with that tendency to limit test.
Yeah.
The higher the walls have to be to hem them in. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. I mean, the disadvantage is if you're a disagreeable kid and you're let run wild, you're kind of like an attack dog that isn't trained. And that's just not good. But an attack dog that is trained, that's a really useful dog, right?
Yeah.
But it takes some real work to socialize. The more aggressive a child is, the harder it is to socialize them.
Yeah.
But if you can socialize them, they're hyper useful.
Yes.
Right. So it's a high risk, high return strategy. Okay, so you went to this church and you were first attracted and the other kids around you by Frisbee, who was kind of charismatic and young. And there was an older gentleman. Yeah. This is also all laid out in the movie, right? In Jesus Revelation.
Yeah. Kelsey Grammer plays Chuck Smith in the film. And I think Chuck came out on one service, and I looked at him and, an adult. I don't want to listen to an adult, it's going to be boring. And he opened the Bible up and he began to speak in such an understandable way. So he's like a father, but a benevolent father, but strong. And so he was someone, I'd never met anyone like this before. Well, apart from Oscar Laurie, who adopted me. And so this was what I needed, a father figure to help me and to be a model for me. And sometimes it's not just in theology, it's just in the practical things of life. You know, he was kind of a salt of the earth guy, hardworking guy. Like for him, a day off was actually building things. So he was like a classic dad. I think they call him trad dads now, you know, but kind of like, wow, this is what I've never seen this before. How interesting, you know? And so,
wow, that's a terrible conundrum to be in too, because you be longing for that, and also the distrust would build in proportion to the longing.
Yeah.
You know, you see people who are really hurt sometimes. It's a terrible thing to watch, because what they'll do when they meet someone they're hoping they could trust them.
Yeah.
They're so afraid of opening themselves up to betrayal one more time that they'll ramp up the misbehavior. And some of them, these are the borderline types, some of them will ramp up the misbehavior past the point where anyone can tolerate it. And then they get rejected. And then they think, oh, well, that's what I expected. But they get in this terrible loop so that they misbehave so badly that it's beyond the ken of anyone human to tolerate it. Yeah, then they're in a permanent betrayal trap. Oh, it's really bad.